XAnalysts. Empowering analysts, transforming markets.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Exploring the Energy Markets podcast. Today, I have a guest from the US, from Houston, Ajith. And we will be diving deep into understanding the topside risk, the risk around the entire Western Hemisphere, starting from Canada, US, and understanding multiple countries in South America, where they are on the journey to produce more. As we know, the Hormuz crisis has really catapulted the importance of energy security. So, will we see a big resurgence coming out of this region and a flood of oil, or we will not? That's the kind of the question we will ponder and delve deeper into this podcast with Ajith. And Ajit brings a very deep experience of geology and understanding of the supply chain, understanding of the operational excellence. So, those are critical elements to make a view going forward on what happens in that region. Welcome, Ajit. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Mukesh. It's a privilege to be here. I really admire the analytical rigor you apply to your analysis and the value of the insights that you bring. So this is a privilege, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit. Now, there is so much more to explore with you, with your deep years of experience. So before I dive into those questions, I would really want you to share with you a little bit more about your journey, what you're doing, what you will be doing, and how do you plan to leverage all that years of experience working in this area?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I'm a geologist by background, but privileged and humbled by the opportunities I've got in my career. Started as a mud logging engineer in offshore Vietnam, and then I kind of moved from a service company to an oil company there in Vietnam when Japan Vietnam Petroleum Company was looking for oil. I was lucky to be part of a team that discovered the field and generated the first oil. So as discovery to first oil, something that's rare in a career, right? It takes 7, 8, 10 years between first discovery and the first oil. So I was lucky to cut my teeth there. And then I spent a lot of my early days in offshore Indonesia, offshore China, offshore India. And then I kind of moved from exploration to what we call as development, field development, projects, those kind of things where you generate the infrastructure, the facilities to produce and extract the oil and gas that you have discovered, right? And I did that. And then I would say the second half of my career has been mostly around operational excellence. And that's been my focus for the last 10, 15 years in Shell. The great run with Shell in the last 18 years. I've just stepped out of Shell. And so I'm looking forward to the next phase where I can bring some of my experience of geology, subsurface, and operational excellence to guide and work with industry leaders to charter this next phase of growth opportunities.
Let me start where you are in Houston. I lived in Houston as well. I witnessed the shale growth, the shale revolution that has taken place, and probably shale is a symbol of operational excellence on how we have seen from 2016 when the export ban was lifted to now. US has become an crude exporter of almost 4 million barrels per day. And if I put together, the Canada, the Latin Americas, the US, what they are exporting to rest of the world is probably north of 10 million barrels per day. So it's kind of becoming almost, in some ways, giving a huge competition to the Middle East and to the OPEC. And we know that the UAE has walked out of the OPEC as well. So OPEC probably may not be able to manage or impact the market. And that leaves a big room for this hemisphere. So let's start with the core engine of that the Western Hemisphere, which is Houston. What's your view, Ajit, straight out of the bat on US production? It has been kind of stagnating. It grew very fast, then stagnating, consolidation. If you have any views around what's really happening in the shale patch.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's pretty complex. Like you rightly pointed out, there has been a tremendous boom, a very long period of growth, accelerated growth. And that was driven largely by very strong investments. It was largely driven by technological advances. I mean, people could drill laterals, long laterals, like you're talking about 5 kilometers now, something unheard of 10, 15 years ago. Better characterization of the fractured the reservoirs you have. So all these aspects have played a role in bringing U.S. shale to where it is today. And interestingly, although the permitting and the regulatory environment has become more favorable for the industry since the new administration has now created those the conditions, um, if you look at the data, the what would have you expected as a jump in rig count, both onshore rigs and offshore rigs, we haven't seen that kind of an explosion. The regulatory conditions have really improved. Permitting is faster. There are a lot of things happening. So if you look at the permitting side, which is kind of the look forward, right? Very good numbers there, but it's not getting translated to wells being drilled. Now, there are several factors to this. One is production is going up, but it is not going at a clip that it was earlier, right? And that is to do a lot with the efficiency gains the industry is achieving through better operations, better management of the reservoir, where they drill, how they drill, when they operate the wells, when they don't, these kind of things. Water management, huge challenge, right? And the second part is using technology, right? So the production gains are coming through better utilization of knowledge and technology and practices, rather than actually just bringing big volumes through the bit, as we call it, right? Volume through the bit, which is drilling and other things. Now, that is not to say drilling is not happening. It is. Offshore, we see a lot of new acreages being given by the Bureau, and that is going to get translated into new activity for sure. So we're going to see this kind of continuation of growth. Deep water, offshore, and onshore will continue. But compared to some of the other potential opportunities we have in the region, I see I see this as a bit of a bit of a balanced view there.
Okay. Fascinating, Ajit, on some of the shale parameters around. You talked about efficiency gains. Rigs are not increasing, so wells are not being drilled, but there are gains that may allow. I looked at the data from the short-term energy outlook from the US EIA, and in October 2025, we were somewhere around 14 million barrels per day crude production. By end of 2027, in January, the estimates were around going down to 13. But now, after the Hormuz crisis, and we have seen higher prices, the latest May estimates indicate 2027 year ending somewhere around 14.3. So we have revised upward more than a million barrels per day. What are the top risks in your mind? Such kind of production growth can recover, can happen, or what do you feel it may not turn out to be as rosy or as good as being projected?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mukesh. So whenever I look at the potential or the range of possibilities, one framework that I all keep in mind is the TCOP, which means technical, economic, commercial, operationability, and politics, right? Any capital investment, any kind of decision is framed around these things. It's a very common industry practice.
Yeah.
So if we start looking at these elements, technically, we have world-class reservoirs in the US, right? Shale is a classic example. We have proven that this can be commercially monetized, right? It was sitting all along. Technology came, the conditions were right, economic conditions, pressures, and other things were right. Investment came in, and we saw the boom. Similarly, in deep water, even right now in Gulf of America, the potential is big, right? And the advantage Gulf of America has against the rest of the deep water theaters is the deep experience we have here. We have the right ecosystem around us. Houston, like you mentioned, is a great example. It's the capital in many ways of oil and gas technology, right? So we have the right partners in terms of technology, subsurface equipment, subsurface processing, ability to construct and build and put very complex systems offshore, far away in deep waters is available. And so the technical aspects, the geology and the reservoir is very well established. There are very little risks there. However, if I look at the risks, then I need to kind of look at onshore potential risks and offshore risks in offshore development, right? And I think if I pick onshore, some of the risks I see is as we go forward, as we continue to expand the potential to tap these reserves, how do we manage water? How do we get power and utilities and other things into this large ecosystem we have created? How do we continue to extract in a sustainable way? Because sustainability has become a big thing, right? Water management. A lot of operators now are very proud of saying they recycle the water, produce water to 95, 98%. Now, yes. So what is the impact to groundwater? What is the impact to the local water resources? All these things are coming into play now. So onshore, those kind of risks are there. The other risk is we have probably already drilled some of the sweetest spots in Permian Basin or any other, basin when it comes to onshore. And so now we are seeing a lot of consolidation for acreage, right? So it's about the question is, are we running out of acreage, the sweet acreage, or is it now going to get tougher to find that kind of sweet spot? Because typically the wells we see, you have a very nice kind of build up, then the plateau, and there's a long tail, right? So the other risk is how do you manage these wells? Because you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of wells, right? How do you manage these wells? So how do you talk about interference of wells and what does that do to production? All these things come into play. And so I see some of these factors playing a role in what could determine where this growth will go. And then combined with offshore, it's about how can you get production out as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible by leveraging existing infrastructure, right? Because the further you go deep water, it gets more complex technically. So the cost of monetizing, what we call as a full cycle cost of infrastructure of drilling these deep wells, it's not small change to drill a deep water well. We know that. And so
any order of magnitude numbers, Ajit, like?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars for a well, whereas onshore you're talking about a few millions, right?
Few millions.
So there's a big difference in the order of magnitude. And there are quite a few players now in the US, both the what we call as the global IOCs, but also very smart regional and independents who are getting much better at this game. And so I see there's a lot of potential, but some of the factors that might influence or dampen or impact the curve is in these areas. How do we manage operational capabilities? How do we make sure our facilities top sites? That's another big thing. A lot of the infrastructure is aging in Gulf of Americas. They were built 20, 30 years ago. And so how do we sustain these platforms, production systems, facilities in a way that they can continue to support in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Because
I mean, this kind of builds a bit of a bias in me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ajit, is that onshore the costs are smaller, offshore the costs are big, but I think the offshore, the technology and whatever is needed to create success exists. Whereas on the onshore, there were challenges around the water and other aspects, which have been now, as you mentioned, dealt with. So with probably AI and more productivity, what I'm hearing is that, yes, it might be possible to achieve some big, rapid, good growth. But yes, the upside will be capped by some of the economics and other kind of risks, right? And if that's the case, we will see where this whole thing lands. But I want to shift gears now. Very next door to US, a little bit down south, we all know Venezuela. And Ajit, we have heard this term 303. That's the 303 billion barrels of reserves in Venezuela. My take is that those numbers were estimated when the oil price was somewhere around $140 a barrel, and it was never corrected down. So probably the real number might not be more than 100 billion barrels of oil. So reserves exist, as you say, the technology exists. What's your take now that Venezuela is operating under a very different umbrella? Multiple companies like Chevron certainly leading, but others are also going in. I heard that Shell is also aiming to do something in that region. So I want to get your take on why we might see a boom in Venezuela or we might not see the boom in Venezuela.
Technically, the reserves are great. I think whether it's 300, 100, or whatever, it's a massive reserve. So in terms of materiality, there's no question. There is materiality. It's proven at one point because of various reasons, right? We know that very well. PDVSA was a great producer. Some of the, and Venezuela was a very strong producer, right? And what we call as capital deterioration, right? Investment deterioration, things have changed, and so production has rapidly declined, unfortunately. So the materiality is there. However, as I move into the commercial space of the TCOP, there's technicality, there's economics. Economics can be worked if the other factors come into play. Commercial terms, operational readiness, operational challenges and risks, and then the political aspect come into play in a big way, right? And that's the big question in Venezuela. Yes, we are seeing a change. The previous administration has now given way to a new one, and there is a lot of talk and optimism around the entire contractual framework changing, because that is one of the most important things. I think a lot of the companies are excited, but they're waiting to see what will come out of the entire, what we call as a petroleum contractual framework, right? It almost
Mm-hmm.
has to become a new one. They have to literally wipe out and put something that's more palatable to the investment, the scale of investment that is required. So if we look at so we know it's heavy oil, extra heavy oil, and that requires a set of conditions, right? So you need diluents to move the heavy oil, extra heavy oil. You need water, you need energy. The question is, are these things available? How quickly they can be brought to bear? And what kind of investment is required to up the game around that, right? Because if you're looking at bumping up production, we need to increase these things. Power has to be reliable, power supply has to be reliable, has to be of the right quality, because we need compression. These extreme heavy oils don't flow, the viscosity
Mm-hmm.
so high. So you need compression, you need pumping capability to move these things. The same thing happens, because they are low energy reservoirs. You need ability to pull them out, right? So there are a lot of these factors that are all dependent on the infrastructure available. What I call as topside facilities, and these are all engineering constrained. It's not reservoir constraint; it's engineering constraint. In our industry, there is something known as the non-technical risk.
Mm-hmm.
NTRs become the biggest factors. And I know so many cases where NTRs have actually killed a project. It's not the technical aspect, it's not the economics, it's a non-technical risk around security, around community resistance, these kind of things, environmental concerns, and contractual instability. So,
Okay. Now that's
yeah.
a good example, and I think that tells me that with US playing a leading role now, and we haven't seen any disruption there. So my bias is that probably the NTRs have probably reduced, and if there is a continuity in the similar policies going forward, like you said, the reserves are there, so Venezuela could again could go to boom. But as you said, that it's not just about the oil, it's not just about the other risks, but the domestic infrastructure, power, and diluents. There's a lot more that needs to happen for the oil to flow, and those risks will weigh and probably will might keep a cap on what Venezuela can produce. talked in the very beginning about Vietnam, the first discovery of oil, and those aspects. So maybe if you connect some of your experience with that, with some of the new countries in Latin America which have come up, like, of course, Guyana is one
Guyana.
country which has been growing quite a lot. So, are there any parallels between what's happening in Guyana and what happened when you struck and the first oil in Vietnam?
Yeah, no, I mean, the excitement is, always great, right? I mean, Guyana 2015, when the discovery was made, there was a lot. I mean, and rightly so. It's a kind of a discovery of a new province, a petroleum province, if you could use that word. And so there is a lot of optimism there. And in a very short period of time, I mean, 10 years in oil terms is not very long because, it takes 5, 7, 10 years for you to really realistically discover something, establish its commercial viability, by drilling some development wells and additional production wells, and then bringing it on as first oil or first gas, right? So this period of 10 years has been seen a lot of exciting growth. I mean, just that one block has generated so much of excitement and optimism, right? And truly, it's world class. I mean, we're talking about now crossing 10 billion barrels kind of reserves, estimates, and other things, right? And rightly so. There's a lot of focus on the from the industry, and the some of the advantages I see with Guyana is the some of the baggage sometimes that comes with established petroleum provinces in terms of legacy contractual frameworks or legacy, margins and other things are not probably there in Guyana. Guyana has started fresh, right? And so some right frameworks have been put into place, which encourages further investment, right? And also it also encourages service companies and others to come in and play because they are important partners in this whole thing. And so when you're talking about people who can EPC, right, who can come and design and build quickly, the right equipment manufacturers to come in and provide the big compressors and other things required, will all play a big role. And I see these set of factors coming together, right? And so there is a lot of potential,
Hmm.
but there is a but.
Okay, so let's hear the but as well.
Yeah. So again, this is my view, and I'm not an expert in the Guyanese petroleum systems. This is a kind of a naive geologist talking. But apart from the big block and the big discoveries that I've made, we haven't seen a lot of commercial successes as step
Mhm.
up, right? When you talk about a petroleum system, a basin, you always talk about a runway, right? What is our fairway? If you find one, you should be able to find similar ones, maybe smaller accumulations, but that is how petroleum systems develop. So there are some successes, but the ability of the industry to come up with another big discovery has not yet been proven. This kind of brings into question the viability of the entire basin, the petroleum system, to generate not just 10 billion, but are we talking about 20, 30, 50, 100 billion, that kind of a thing, right? That's the kind of materiality that we are looking for, hoping for, that will then establish a very long term 20, 30-year kind of a potential, right?
Okay,
And
so I think
so,
what you're mentioning, Ajit, is that there has to be a replication of continued find the new discoveries. If you're resting and you're only extracting on one find, then there is a limit to what it can bring out to the ground.
yeah,
With
there is potential.
that,
There's a
Ajit.
lot of exploration activity going on, but we
Mhm.
have to prove that.
With that, Ajit, you have, as you mentioned, geology, right? A lot of analysts may not, and I even also do not fully understand. So maybe if you can give a little bit of a quick educational tour as well. What happens when you said discovery to first oil? What are the steps? Maybe if you can describe in some simple language which the viewers can also understand, and they can build a better appreciation of what really the magic of geology.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I go back to my professor when I was in grad school, describing a geologist as a detective who comes onto the crime scene uh, tens of millions of years later and tries to put
Okay.
together what happened, right? So it's almost like a detective story, and that's what fascinated me into getting into geology. And it's that's very much the case because it starts with an idea with very little data. Because when you go into a kind of what we call as new exploration acreages, right? Frontier exploration, there is very high level hypothesis in place. We're saying, hey, this system looks very similar to. So, for instance, a lot of comparisons are made between Western Africa, and the Latin American coast, Atlantic coast, because at one time they were part of the same continent, and then they split during the continental drift. So we look at these basins and say this basin has a lot of potential, has a lot of similarities to the basin where it's proven. It starts with that. And then you go in, collect some seismic data to start building a picture of the subsurface. And these are like what we call as 2D, 3D seismic data
Hmm.
acquisition, right? These are expensive, but they have to cover a large area. So what you're doing is you're using seismic, aerial photography, various other tools, satellite imageries to kind of narrow down the area where you want to focus. Because you offshore, you're talking about hundreds square kilometers of area, right? And so that's where then geology and geophysics starts coming together. Because, and there is a joke, and I can make this joke because I'm a geologist. They say if you ask four geologists, they'll come up with probably 10 models.
Hmm.
So geology is a lot of science and art because you're trying to build a model of a subsurface system that's sitting 2, 3, 6 kilometers below the surface of the earth through indirect methods, right? You never go and see it. So the seismic data acquisition helps you to build a geological model.
Hmm.
And then using some other parameters, if a few wells have been drilled in the region, you will use the data of the drilled well to understand pressures and other dynamics, reservoir dynamics. And then you determine where you would like to put your first wildcat well. That's the key. And I've seen so many times
What do
the
you call it?
selection
Wildcat.
wildcat, because you
Okay.
really don't know if there is oil or gas at all. A lot of indicators might be there which says there is potential for hydrocarbon, but we don't know. In extremely data constrained world, you can easily misunderstand a signal to be hydrocarbon signal, and it
Hmm.
could be something else. So things have changed, of course, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. So I would say geology and geoscience is all about narrowing down the uncertainty to as low as possible. You can never eliminate uncertainty and never eliminate risk. The risk is always there. But how can you narrow down the risk of or increase the probability of success, as we call it, POS, probability of success? That is the fundamental goal of the entire geotechnical team, right?
With that, I want to shift gears, Ajit, and try and understand. There are many countries in Latin America. Uh, are there any in particular which you want to focus on and talk about, where you say that something is not fully understood by the market or the people who are watching? Any particular country you want to put a spotlight on?
The country that I would probably pick is Argentina.
Hmm.
And a couple of reasons for that, from an opportunity perspective, but also from a slightly sobering challenges perspective. One is Vaca Muerta and in the surrounding areas of Argentina, shale is world class. I mean, you can compare that with any other shale play in the world, US shale and a Canadian shale, world class reservoir, world class, system in place. And then there is investment that has gone in for quite some time, which is now proving, right? The production is coming up, it's stabilizing. We are talking about reaching 1 million barrels kind of, figure, which is a big figure because you cross that hurdle, you're now in a serious player space. And so that is continuing. But I think the challenges I see is how quickly the industry there can again go and tackle the issues around water availability, bringing the infrastructure needed to expand at a scale. Because you're talking about Argentinian accumulation is one thing, but monetizing means taking it somewhere where it can be shipped. So what do you do with that, right? Do you go build pipelines? There are already existing pipelines, but how do you take it over the Andes into the Pacific and convert them to LNG, or do you take it to the Atlantic? And there are both options being considered, and each has challenges. I mean, taking gas over the Andes is not a small thing. That needs a lot of investment. It needs a lot of you're crossing environmentally very sensitive areas. So again, I come back to the commercial, operational, and politics aspects. The having the right industry incentives in place to attract long-term investment, for giving the assurance to the industry that there's potential for investment returns to come. That's the end of the day. Shareholder returns is the most important thing that drives everything, right? So return on investment, a good line of visibility around that is very critical. And to some extent, we still need to see clarity around that, right? Or stabilization, I would say.
Okay. Well, Argentina oil is coming to Australia for processing in the two refineries here. After the Hormuz crisis, Ajit, we have seen Argentinian barrels, and the Australian refineries are designed for some light sweet barrels, so they are a very good fit. And we have seen those barrels actually flowing to I think so. There is a bit of a diversification
Yes.
happening for the Argentinian barrels, where they can go and they can command a sort of a higher value. Now, picking on the shale, we have read a news around UAE. There is some sort of a discovery of some shale reserves or in the UAE. And some people are talking about that maybe the reason why UAE walked out of the OPEC, because the shale has to be, developed in a very different way than a conventional system, right? It's hard to prove or disprove at this point of time. But what I wanted to ask you, what are the key reasons why shale is a success mostly in the US, and why, other than Argentina, or shale could become a success in Australia, in China, in many other parts of the world? Are there any special reasons why it is limited to the US? Is it technology or what it is?
That's a great question. I mean, you don't hear this question very often. And when you talk about shale, yeah, you're right. I mean, China is a big shale play. Australia is a shale play, or what we call as a shallow gas play. There are lots of other areas where there is such plays. I think, in my view, and there are lots of schools of thoughts around this. So it's my view. I think it's the confluence of factors that have enabled this to happen in the US. And one of the most important things to me is around the contractual and economic stability. When an investment happens, there is a very clear line of sight of the return of the investment. And you're not talking about 1, 2, 5 years, talking about long term. That's what this time horizon is for oil and gas industry, right? You're talking about 20, 30-year investment return. And so that's one of the fundamental reasons the ecosystem created around permitting, regulation, and the incentives given to the industry in various forms has created the ecosystem to kind of attract the capital needed. But that has also attracted technology development. You haven't seen the kind of technology development anywhere in the world as we saw during the boom, right? I mean, we had partners like Schlumberger, Halliburton, drilling companies, other technology innovators coming and kind of really pushing the envelope on technology. How far can we go? Geosteering, placing wells within 10 centimeters. I mean, this is the kind of precision we could achieve in the US, which is very difficult in other areas where the ecosystem is not there, right? So those are some of the areas. I think technology played a big role, and the belief in the industry. And also, one of the things that really drove the US growth, we have big players now. But if you really look at the pioneers, it was the independents and the small ones who were ready to take the risk. So there's a lot of difference between companies who are ready to take risk and explore versus companies that would like to come in later and pay for the risk, de-risking of that play. And so US shale, I think, boom or the growth, I believe, was largely driven by these kind of innovative companies who took a risk on it.
That
And
part I agree, Ajit, that I remember that we used to call, these pop and mom wells. And these wells were at a certain point of time contributing almost more than 1.5 or 2 million barrels per day. If you aggregate all those wells, and
yeah,
these can operate. And I also feel that my understanding is that technology and capital can be arranged. But one another big factor, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that the ownership of the land. If you find oil in your backyard, it's your oil. That's so unique and special about, I guess, Texas or US, which is nowhere in the world. That has also enabled probably this innovation and this entrepreneurial risk taking, which I don't know any other part of the world is ready for yet. I've done a bit of a tour of the hemisphere or the axis, what I call the Americas, with Canada. You're highlighting they have different kind of advantages, stability, I guess, technology, and the US certainly has. And then now we are seeing some impact of US also showing up in Venezuela and probably in Guyana. And I understand that there was a time when Guyana was fearful of a capture by Venezuela. I think that risk has gone away. So Guyana should have some more geopolitic dis-risking. I
yes,
also heard that Guyana is a light sweet barrel, Venezuela is a heavy barrel. So there is a lot of blending opportunity play, which
correct.
might be synergistic in this. Are there any other things, Ajit, in your mind, and where analysts who don't know geology, who don't know the details, the devil is in the details, get it all wrong? Any things that come in your mind to watch?
Well, I mean, not get it wrong. I would say there are nuances that are very important and play a big role in how a province or a system or a basin or a field is eventually monetized. And it goes back to geology. And I'll give you an example. US shale is relatively straightforward in the sense that the shale has been developed in a fairly passive kind of a geological setting. Whereas if you look at the shales of Argentina, they're extremely complex,
Okay.
geologically complex, faulted, folded, Andes mountain. This is this butting against the Andes. And so it's extreme. They're very thick reservoirs, but then they are fractured and folded, and you have pressure issues, high pressure somewhere, pressure depletion another place, compartmentalization. All these things make it extremely difficult geologically and complex to drill. In fact, it's more expensive to drill in these parts, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, and Argentina, because of this factor. A lot of big companies
Mm.
have burned their hands trying to drill in these wells and in these areas and have gone home without anything after burning through billions. Whereas that factor is to a large extent not there in the US, and which has played a big role in the acceleration we saw. And I don't know
That's
whether that is one of the things that is holding back Argentinian. It eventually will be resolved, I hope, through better imaging. Like you said, AI based. We have now seen huge changes. We're using AI to kind of constrain the uncertainty to a large extent, and also constrain the time we take from data acquisition to model development to a clear understanding of reserves and other things. We are crunching the time. All these factors play a big role.
fascinating. I think that's a very, very insightful thing about probably people. You're right. People don't think about that. Texas is a flat land, whereas Argentina is probably mountains folded and fault. I think that's a really, the depth of understanding of geology is so critical. Ajit, we have talked about a lot of the nuances, and I think the nuance you brought around Argentina, folded, faulted, Andes, mountains, which is not there in the Texas. Uh, I want to ask you, what are your top three things to watch or projections going forward for the entire Americas kind of an oil and exploration system?
Yeah, that's a question that really it requires a lot of pondering. So I think the trajectory of growth for the Americas was always there, but I think what has happened now with the Strait of Hormuz and the whole structural restructuring that's going at a systemic level suddenly is presenting opportunities that we probably had not anticipated for the Americas region. So with a lot of factors favoring.
One thing I can say, OPEC is probably like Venezuela is not part of the OPEC, probably. Russia is
Yeah,
on its own and UAE is walked out. So maybe the US shale doesn't need to worry about OPEC.
exactly. I mean, there was at one point this whole fear and what if OPEC does that? What will it do to the shale oil pricing? That's gone because it's such a big player now, right? I mean, like you said earlier in the conversation, we are big exporters now. And so we now have a lot of influence over the overall economics. Anyway, but going back to the point, I think what I was trying to do here is the confluence of factors and geopolitical circumstances. I think is presenting itself in a way that's very was not anticipated some time back. And for countries like Canada and the US, and to a large extent Brazil, there are a lot of regulatory, economic, and legal and economic settings that just help in acceleration that other countries do not have the advantage of. And so I can see Canada accelerating on its gas, very, plausible that that will happen to an extent where, I mean, US is becoming a huge LNG player, right? That will continue. And so we can see the kind of the axis shifting, right? And that's one thing. But then on the wings of this kind of movement, countries like Venezuela and Argentina can, like they say, a rising tide lifts several boats. So with this kind of rising tide, we can see the momentum building in Argentina and Venezuela that we had not anticipated some time back. To me, that is a very kind of a possible scenario.
And I think that connects to the point, Ajit, that US also has worked in some ways to, let's say, get China out of the backyard of Latin America, South America, and that geopolitical, let's say, change is also will likely present certain different opportunities which did not exist before. So US is likely to take more serious attention to the growth and what happens in their backyard, which previously probably they were not doing at that point of time. And that presents some more opportunities. So I guess if I put all this together, what's happening in the world, Hormuz, maybe OPEC weakening, US taking a bit more, Western Hemisphere dominance, plus building on its technology strength in AI and how it sees the different parts of the game. I believe that this America's Axis is probably set for another boom possible cycle. And let's see, maybe 2027 could be the year of a drill, baby drill. But let's wait and watch for that.
Absolutely. Very optimistic future, I would
Yeah.
say.
Well, thank you, Ajit. Our goal is not to paint optimistic, or I mean, I'm an analyst, you are a geologist, and we have tried to connect the dots, the nuances, and I'm sure more than just providing projections to the market, the mission with which I'm doing XAnalysts is to really inspire a lot of young analysts, engineers to become. My take is analyst go and understand the engineering side of it, and for the analyst, and for I would say, the analyst, vice versa. Go and understand the engineering side, go and understand for engineers the market, the commercial side of it. And ultimately, as you have used the framework TCOP multiple times, I guess that's the one to go after and learn more about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I really appreciate, Mukesh, the opportunity has given me to kind of exchange ideas and to explore some of these topics and themes. Thank you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank
Analysts. Empowering analysts, transforming markets.